facing 1 year after the fall of Assad's regime. The fighting between the Syrian transitional government and the Syrian democratic forces led to changed geopolitical landscape in Aleppo and northeast Syria, with major gains for Damascus. The handling of the situation in the northeast will be a decisive and indicative test for the Syrian transitional government. There is now a window of opportunity for Syria to show that it can move forwards and towards a truly inclusive transition. The Syrian transitional government and the Syrian democratic forces are currently implementing the 30th January agreement, which includes, first, integration in the mainstream administrative and security forces, second, political participation of Kurds in local and central governance, third, education recognition, and fourth, governmental control over key oil fields, airport and border crossings. It is important that the presidential decree of the 16th January, granting a broad spectrum of rights to the Kurdish people, is fully implemented. The recent developments also highlight the ongoing security risks, especially the potential resurgence of Daesh. We remain concerned about the escape of an unknown number of detainees. While transferring detainees to Iraq will alleviate pressure on Syria, the burden remains significant. Damascus is now the main interlocutor for countering terrorism. Nonetheless, the Kurds have been a steadfast ally against terrorism, and we hope that they will remain engaged while integrated in the mainstream Syrian institutions. The EU and member states are the main donors for Syria, including regarding the camps and northeast Syria. We will continue supporting Syria through bilateral assistance and within the framework of the global coalition. As the largest humanitarian donor, the European Union remains also committed to providing humanitarian aid to Syrians as long as needed. However, humanitarian assistance alone cannot meet all the needs in Syria and must be complemented with increased development and recovery funding. Since the fall of Assad, the European Union has adapted its relationship with Syria to support an inclusive political transition that means the aspiration of all Syrians by leveraging political dialogue, sanctions, and assistance. In 2025, we hosted the 9th Brussels conference. We also launched the Syria Partnership Coordination Forum and co-organized the Day of Dialogue focused on civil society. We also mobilized then 424 million euro in European Union support for Syria, including 175 million euro for social economic recovery, which we must drive forward even more vigorously. The visit of Presidents both von der Leyen and Costa on the 9th of January was a clear signal of our willingness to engage with Damascus. It has highlighted a new political partnership, reinforcing economic cooperation and offering a new substantial financial package of 620 million euros for 2026 and 2027. There is clearly a mutual interest for us and the Syrians to work together on institution and capacity building. Through this, the European Union can anchor the transition in key principles of sustainable governance, accountability, and justice, and contribute to rebuilding trust between the state and society. The European Union remains committed to engaging with Syria and regional partners in view of ensuring both an inclusive transition and stability and security. Thank you so much.
Okay, and teraz poprosím paní kolegyňu Terlák.
And now, Ms. Terlák for the EPP.
That you don't fall down on the stairs, it can be dangerous. Happens to best of us.
Oh,
Thank you. Dear colleagues, Northeast Syria is once again descending in violence, and civilians are paying the price. Since early January, clashes between government forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces have spread from Aleppo towards Raqqa, al-Sahaka, and Deir ez-Zor. The consequences are devastating. Hundreds of thousands without electricity, water, or food. Over 170,000 people displaced, and children are dying from cold, hunger, and lack of basic medical care. At the same time, the fragile security architecture that kept Daesh contained is unraveling. Turmoil around detention centers such as El Hol and Roy has already led to the escape of ISIL fighters. Let us be clear. What happens in these camps will not stay in Syria. It directly affects Europe. We take note of the ceasefire and integration agreement of 30th January. A cessation of hostilities is essential, but stability cannot come at the expense of rights, representation, and local governments. The Kurdish population, which paid a heavy price in the fight against Daesh, especially the ladies, must be meaningfully included in Syria's political future. We condemn the serious human rights violation reported in recent weeks and call for independent investigations and full UN access. This Parliament must act by increasing humanitarian aid, supporting counter-terrorism efforts, protecting minorities, and advancing an inclusive Syrian-led political transition. Europe must not look away. Thank you so much.
Ďakujem pekne. A teraz poprosím kolegu Maniatisa za skupinu.
Thank you, Mr. Maniatis, for the Socialists.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε,
Speaker, President, the situation in northeastern Syria is extremely fragile and very, very concerning. From the beginning of January, we have military conflicts. The attack of the forces of the temporary government, transitional government against the Kurds and the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the repeated violations of the ceasefire have led to displacements, massive displacements, lack of basic services, and increasing danger for the civilians, and especially for women and children. The agreement of the 30th of January is an important step towards stabilization. However, it should be implemented and should lead to a real inclusive transition which will respect the self-government regime of northeastern Syria. The transitional government has to prove that it means what it says. Words are not enough anymore. We need specific actions that will assure the political and cultural rights of all the religious and ethnic minorities in Syria. The European Union has responsibility to support actively this procedure. We should support the new Syrian government. However, any financing should be accompanied by very serious points concerning the protection of fundamental rights of all citizens, irrespective of their religion and nationality and ethnicity. We should condemn the destabilizing role played by third countries, such as Turkey. Turkey is creating the tension in northeastern Syria and attacks in Kobani the Kurds, where the humanitarian situation is extremely critical. Finally, we shouldn't forget that thousands of ex-fighters of Daesh remain in the region. The danger of them being set free and to have terrorism reborn in the area is something more than tangible. Today, our message should be clear. Ceasefire, protection of the civilians, respect of rights, and a real inclusive political transition protecting the rights of all citizens. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Tarča za skupinu Patrioti pre Európu. Nech sa páči.
Mr. Touch.
Thank you.
Mr. Touch.
A year ago in Moscow, Assad, the last dictator, went over to Moscow and was replaced by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham leader, Ahmad al-Sharaa, propped up by Western leaders. And we deal with them as though they were democratic leaders for the future in Syria. We warned about the danger of this unconditional support of these Islamists against vulnerable groups. Whilst this parliament legitimized Ahmad al-Sharaa as a leader, it acted very naively when he said that he was going to have an inclusive transition. And yet what we saw was death. And the same went for the Druses in the south of the country, although Israel got involved to protect them. Now it's up to the Kurds in the northeast of Syria. It's their turn with ethnic cleansing and religious cleansing, also subsidized by Turkey. Well, Islamist inclusive transition, that doesn't mean anything. There's the threats of reprisals and jihadist terrorism. What we are not seeing is respect for the life of non-Muslim minorities. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Bielana za Európskych konzervatívcov a reformistov. Nech sa páči.
Mr. Bielan.
Regime in December 2024 ended 5 decades of Ba'athist authoritarianism, long sustained by Russian military, financial, and political support. Moscow's intervention prolonged the war, enabled mass atrocities, and destabilized the region far beyond Syria's border. Yet Assad's collapse has not brought stability. Power vacuums are being filled by fragmented armed groups, and the transitional government's leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, emerging from a Sunni Islamist militant background, shows no remorse for past ties to Al-Qaeda. How can Syria move toward peace when the remnants of jihadist networks risk replacing one form of authoritarian rule with another? Not to mention ISIS and the threat of its resurgence as jihadist fighters have escaped from prisons, including some holding EU citizenship. This creates a direct threat to the European security. The EU's position must be clear. Syria cannot move from dictatorship into jihadist instability.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Loaz za skupinu Renew Europe. Nech sa páči.
Chers collègues, vous m'avez
Be your rapporteur on Syria, and it's an honor. And I want to talk to you about honor. I would like Europe to honor its debt, that which it has with the Kurdish people who fought with us against Daesh for more than 10 years. The Kurds are brothers in arms. And knowing that they depend on humanitarian convoys and that they're encircled is not acceptable. We need to help them against Turkey and other people who are working against them. The terms of the 29th of January needs to be respected. This agreement would not have happened without the involvement of France, and France has the honor to have contributed to a ceasefire and Kurdish specificity. And the rise of Damas wouldn't have been possible without the support of Turkey and the laissez-faire, hands-off approach of the US. Washington and Ankara took the risk through their indifference in having a situation where jihadi prisoners could escape. There is nothing honorable about the choices they've made. But let's come back to Europe. We need to make our support to Syria conditional upon the respect of all of Syria's peoples. it's up to us to face the situation of the jihadi prisoners whose fate is as important to us as it is to Syria and Iraq. They are for us a security risk that we've had for years subcontracted out to the Kurds in Syria. We can no longer look the other way. It's about our own security and also about our honor.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegyňu Neumann zo skupinu Zelených, Európska slobodná aliancia.
Well, dear colleagues, the brutal attacks on the northeast are a painful reminder of Syria's darkest chapters. An entire generation in Syria has grown up under Assad's cruel dictatorship and civil war. Every new escalation opens wounds that never had the time to heal. The violence must end once and for all, and this is the responsibility of all sides. And it is al-Shara's responsibility, if he wants to be the president of Syria, to be a president for all Syrians and to ensure that Syria is safe for everyone. For decades, majority Kurdish areas have been the most democratic and inclusive parts of Syria. They are a blueprint for the future many Syrians hope for. Kurdish rights are now written into a decree. But real guarantees must be enshrined into the constitution, and Kurdish representatives need to have a seat at the table in Damascus. And we also have a homework of our own, dear colleagues. For years, I have called on our governments to repatriate Daesh fighters and families to bring them to justice in Europe. Now the risk of Daesh regrouping is higher than ever. I would rather see these fighters in European prisons than back on the battlefields. And all of this clearly shows Syria is not safe for forced returns. Instead of scaring Syrians in Europe and fueling toxic migration debates, let's all focus on helping rebuild a country that finally has a chance to heal its wounds and becomes free for everyone.
Ďakujem. Prosím kolegu Schindervana za skupinu Lavice v Európskom parlamente. Nech sa páči.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
President Kobane is under siege, and they're surrounded by the troops of the Syrian troops. Their lack of food, medicine, water is short, and we have. How can we have the jihadist al-Shara having become the best friend of the Europeans? Mrs. von der Leyen gave Syria large sum of money on the very day when the al-Shara started his war against the Kurds. That wasn't bad timing. That's the outcome of a cynical political approach, the only goal of which is to get the Syrian refugees out of Europe, away from Europe, as far as possible and turn them back to Syria. I spoke with Mr. Kobani, and people who, regardless of their religion and ethnic belonging, just want a fair society in Syria. These people need international support, and instead of that, we have France and Germany turning their back on our allies there. And we have a murderous ideology wearing a tailor-made suit, but it still remains murderous ideologies. We mustn't roll out the red carpet for al-Shara. We need the Kurds to win the day in order to ensure a democratic and fair Syria. It was a tower of hope in the Middle East. But now all of this is under attack by the government in Syria, and we mustn't give al-Sharaa any money. We need an end to the fighting. We need to recognize self-government, and we need to stand up for the rights of the Kurds. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Sala za skupinu Európa suverénnych národov.
And now, Mr. Herschel.
Gewonnen haben die Islamisten, der neue Präsident.
Well, the new president of Syria comes from an offshoot group from Al-Qaeda, and the European Commission is supporting this regime with money. 600 million, I think, was handed over when the president of the Commission went to Syria. So that's something we need to talk about. Now, the latest victims of your values are the Kurds. There are terrorists attacking them, and also terrorists are escaping from the prisons that the Kurds were watching. Now, we are funding these Syrian Islamists, and that is a problem. Now, 1 million Syrians live in Germany. Only a third of them are working, but they're overrepresented when it comes to rapes, murders, etc. Many German women have been raped by foreigners. And those are the values, I would say, that you stand for. The war finished over a year ago now. Friedrich Merz has announced that he's going to be deporting lots of people. But do you know how many Syrians have been deported since he said that? Just one single one. But we've had 50,000 new migrants during that time. In Berlin, Syrians celebrated the fall of Assad. But we need to ensure that they can live their dreams in Syria rather than in Europe. So our priorities are clear. Let's send Syrian refugees back. We need also to send Ursula von der Leyen to the moon, I would say.
Prosím kolegu Sancheza Amora.
Thank you. Mr. Sanchez Amor.
Thank you, President. I'll be speaking in Spanish. Dear Commissioner, some friendly advice for institutions of the EU. We shouldn't interfere in the institutional design of the country. If all minorities are included, the war has changed reality on the ground. That now needs to be changed into a constitution and a legal system. And the country has to decide how its new constitution reflects the new reality on the ground. We shouldn't carry on giving a blank check to the government to keep playing this double game of uncontrolled militias and a national army. When something goes banned, they send in the militias, it's the Alawites, and if not, then it's the national army. This has to be part of the conditions we set. The government has to stop using or saying that it doesn't control the militias when things go well, and when things do go well, it just uses the army. So we actually have to tackle this issue of the dual face of power in the country. And as we've heard, we have to support the minorities who have values closest to those of us in Europe. Thank you.
Teraz poprosím kolegu Garo. Nech sa páči.
La Syrie est engagée dans un affrontement armé contre les forces. Syria is in armed conflict with the Kurds, who were on the front line against the jihadi groups. So this is the context, and hundreds of jihadi fighters have now escaped from prisons that are no longer controlled by the Kurds. Now, this is a time bomb. This area is at the doors of Europe. For years, we have been criticizing the failures of European democracies, particularly France, and they have compromised themselves now. Macron was the first to receive the Syrian president with all honors, and the president's links to Al-Qaeda are well known. Islamist armed groups have plunged Syria into terrorism and violence. Now, the European executive and the French government have refused to look reality in the face, and now they're sitting on a veritable powder keg. These terrorists are now escaping prisons, as I say, and no one knows where they are. But I think the answer is clear. What they're going to try and do is get to Europe by any means possible, taking advantage of the mass immigration that's being allowed to take place. And every jihadi is now a direct threat to European citizens. We can't have our countries exposed to this kind of danger just for ideological reasons. We need to boost checks at the borders and stop these migration flows. The security of our citizens cannot be negotiated away. We can't have Syrian chaos in our streets. Thank you.
Teraz poprosím kolegu Gambina, nech sa páči.
Colleagues, the situation in northeastern Syria is extremely delicate. Violence against civilians continues, particularly against Christians and other minorities. The conflict has been going for many years. The agreement between Damascus and the Syrian Kurds it gives us some hope, but its situation is still very uncertain. Guarantees of security, monitoring mechanisms, and the risks of not being able to have a ceasefire, all of these things continue. We need to react with practicality and responsibility. We need to support a sustainable ceasefire, protection of minorities, ensuring security in northeastern Syria. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Al-Sahlani. Nech sa páči.
Mrs. Al-Salani, please.
Somehow a debate about the dire situation in Syria turned into a migration debate by the far right. That's amazing. But President, dear colleagues, when al-Shara took to power, we all accepted him with a very bitter taste. So today I'm standing here in a Kurdish traditional dress to honor the Kurdish women and the people who have paid a very high price for their freedom. When they answered our call for help, were we trying to face Daesh, ISIS, the most horrible terror organization, they were not only defending their homes, but they were also defending our freedom. Kurds are asking for our help now. The roles are reversed. Protection that is denied is injustice. An injustice that is postponed is a justice that is denied. Kurdish women are not left alone even when dead, because when they die, the terrorists cut off their braids. The attacks on the Kurdish areas has to stop now. A ceasefire has to come now. And taking away, lifting the de facto siege on Kobani has to lift now. Kurds, we see you, we hear you. You have more friends than the mountains in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Teraz ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Satoriho.
Thank you. Mr. Satoré.
Je vais vous raconter une histoire.
Let me tell you a story, a French story, the story of Europe giving up on its principles. Hamza is the person I'm going to talk about. He's French. When he was 12, he was taken to Syria by his mother. He was exposed to war, death, the camps in northeast Syria, and he never chose that. His childhood was stolen from him. He's 22 years old. He's not guilty of anything. But while I speak, he is in an Iraqi prison. He's being interrogated and beaten up. Now, why is he in Iraq? Because France let it happen. He's not guilty of anything, but France is guilty. France is guilty of refusing to repatriate its citizens, particularly those children who were forced to Syria. There are dozens of people like Hamza. I've met some of them, and they're waiting to be repatriated. Their parents are waiting to go to court and face justice, and victims associations want to see them in court. So let's act in line with our principles. Let's repatriate these children because they're innocent, and let's bring these adults back to trial. Thank you.
Salis.
Ilaria Salis.
Thank you. In recent days, we lived with deep, dark concern for the fate of the autonomous administration of northeast Syria, for the present and the future of the democratic confederalist revolution. We fear the worst, but as our comrades on the ground taught us, we never abandon resistance. We never lost hope. Now, an agreement with the transitional government of Syria has been signed. If this was possible, it is thanks to the massive, powerful mobilization of the peoples of northeast Syria. It is thanks to the rise of the Kurdish people across Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. And it is also thanks to the international solidarity. Now, we must stay vigilant. We must ensure that every single term of that agreement is respected. We are not naive. We know that agreements are often disrespected and always reflect relations of power. This is why it's up to us to do everything we can to strengthen the honest. Democratic confederalism is not just a regional project. It is a concrete alternative of peace and justice in the world dominated by nationalism, suprematism, and violence. It is for the Kurds, but not only for the Kurds. It is for Arabs, Assyrians, Armenians, Yazidis, and Turkmen. It is for women. It is for everyone who wish to live free. This struggle concerns us all. And the illegal siege of Kobane, humanitarian access now. Biji biji ROJAVA.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fröhlich.
Herr Präsident, Sie bejubelten Assads.
You were happy when al-Jilani came to power. He's a former al-Qaeda terrorist. He's now walking on the red carpet, meeting the great and the good from Europe, and you wonder about the end of Kurdish autonomy in the north. You're naive. You want to stabilize Syria. You need to speak with the players in the area, with Erdogan, with others. We have taken many Syrians. Turkey has taken many Syrians. Assad is gone, and now they need to go back to Syria so that we can get stability in Syria. And we need to avoid chaos and mass migration. We need diplomacy. The ceasefire is good, but it's a brittle ceasefire. If the people flee their country once again, we're going to have Syrian problems in Europe once again.
Thank you very much. Mr. Geisel.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
President, colleagues, in Syria, we're seeing a moral and security policy-based admission of failure. For a decade, we celebrated the Kurds as heroes. Over 11,000 Kurdish fighters lost their lives in order to defeat IS, also for our security here in Europe. And how do we thank them? Well, we just look on while they're being attacked on all sides. The UN has reported that 170,000 people have been expelled from their homes. Over 90% of them women and children. In Camp Mishli, children are freezing in their schools, while here we simply talk. Now, we are not going to see a decentralized Syria. We're going to see a power vacuum in which IS will thrive. Let's not abandon the Kurds. Anyone who agrees to abandoning the Kurds shouldn't be surprised to see terror return in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Zovko.
Madam Commissioner, the situation in Syria remains extremely fragile, and once again, it is civilians and minorities who are bearing the heaviest burden. From the very beginning of the political transition, I have consistently underlined that the protection of all minorities must be at the core of any credible and sustainable solution for Syria. Safeguarding their rights is prerequisite for peace, reconciliation, and long-term stability. Syria continues to face a profound absence of legitimate and inclusive governance. There is no functioning parliament, no credible electoral process, and no meaningful space for civil participation. This institutional vacuum has only deepened fragmentation and mistrust across communities. At the same time, deepening destabilization through the ongoing destruction of cultural and religious heritage represents an attack on its identity and history. Decades of enforced authoritarian centralization have already demonstrated their failure. Reproducing this model will only lead to renewed conflict and further marginalization of minorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează Daniela.
Mr. Hattat.
When ISIS was advancing, many looked away, but the Kurdish forces did not. They fought, they bled, and they died, not just for their land, but also for our own security here in Europe. Today, the very forces that crushed Daesh risk being dismantled. This is not just morally wrong, but it was also strategically reckless. In Rojava, we saw something rare in Syria and beyond. Women leading, communities coexisting, local self-rule instead of sectarian chaos. And what was our response? The European Commission pledged 600 million to Damascus without real conditionality, no hard guarantees on rights, and no real accountability. This is not foreign policy. In my opinion, this is just wishful thinking. Let's be clear. Support for Syria is good, but it must also mean protection for Kurdish rights, security guarantees, and strict human rights conditionalities. Otherwise, we will betray those who defeated ISIS, and in the meantime, we weaken our own security. Europe must stop being naive. Stability without rights is just an illusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează domnul
Mr. Hovany.
Madam Commissioner, Szíria ma nagyon veszélyes irányba halad.
Syria is heading to a very dangerous place now. Plenty of terrorists have been leashed upon the nation. The government hasn't been able to do much in order to protect minorities. Between 2026 and 27, Syria is going to receive about 620 million in support from the EU. The stability of Syria and respect for minority rights is a basic security interest for Europe. The ISIS may be revived. We have to face this option. Kurdish troops are defending Europe at this point in time. We have to admit it. We remember 2015 when 10 million people had to leave their homes because of ISIS attacks, and it leashed migrants in quantities never seen before on Europe. We have to prevent this from happening.
Mr. Troshu. Madam Troshu.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. After 15 years of civil war, Syrian suffering continues, and today it's the minorities, the Kurds and the Christians and the Alawites who are suffering. If Europe really wants to help Syria to rebuild, it needs to insist that al-Sharaa protect minorities. And the report on asylum is a real skylum because it denies the suffering of Christians in Syria, but does not say the worries about the fate of others. The EU needs to ensure the protection of minorities and the end of all complacency with regard to jihadi groups. Syria also needs its Christians to rebuild. Europe also needs to protect itself, and the member states need to be able to strip people of their European nationality and refuse their jihadis to return to Europe, those people who have burnt their passports and been terrorists. And Europe needs to stop being naive.
Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, President, Commissioner and colleagues. The agreement of March 2025 between the Kurds, the SDF and the government promised some hope for the future. However, that is looking increasingly fragile. The blundering attempts by President Trump are no match for the staying power of the European Union, and I believe that the Union has a really critical role now, providing its credibility and its long-term staying power and institutional approach to broker a longer-term peace. This must be matched by long-term support for good governance and support for the political economy of reconciliation. There is no room in complex post-conflict environments for a winner-takes-all approach. It is possible to reconcile the sovereignty of Damascus with the Kurdish aspirations, which should be guaranteed. The lessons of Libya, Sudan, and other fragile states are clear. When basic needs are ignored and civilian protection is sidelined, violence inevitably returns. In Sudan, we missed the window to support democratic transition. We cannot do the same in Syria. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează domnul Asens Ludra.
Madam Asens-Yodra. Thank you very much. Madam Commissioner, talking about Syria today is also talking about the structural hypocrisy of Europe, because whilst we set sanctions on Iran in the name of human rights, we've got Gaza and we look away when faced with crimes being committed in Syria by Turkey and the Syrians. Human rights. Why sanctions in Iran and not sanctions on Turkey or Syria? Because Turkey has a European border, and because Syria was someone we treated as a terrorist, but now is a useful ally. Europe doesn't have a human rights policy. It has an interests policy. We use the Kurds when they're fighting ISIS, but now we've abandoned them. Not useful anymore. ROJAVA really showed up this cynicism. The women were at the heart of the democratic revolution. When we abandoned ROJAVA, we abandoned the women. And the question is, what will happen to these women? It's actually what will happen to Europe when it abandons the values it says it defends.
Demirel Özlem.
Thank you, Madam Demirel.
Thank you, President. Well, in the Middle East, we're seeing the cynicism of large powers. They're basically interfering. The Kurds have been distributed over 4 states. For decades, their existence has been denied. They've been suppressed. Nevertheless, they managed to build something that expressed hope, ROJAVA. It was democratic and there was hope for everyone. They fought ISIS, and as gratitude, they're being sold up the river by the West. Von der Leyen is cooperating with al-Shara, the former IS terrorist, gives him millions in assistance, in spite of massacres being carried out on Alawites, Kurds, and the Druze. We're quiet while Kobani is under siege. But, colleagues, the Kurds have an expression which says, resistance is life. Throughout their history, the Kurds have fought, they're still there, and they will continue to fight for a democratic, sustainable, and just solution in the Middle East for all people in Kurdistan. And that's regardless of what the Commission does. They will continue to fight. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you, Mr. Foulas.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioner. Northeastern Syria is bleeding again. And when we talk about geopolitical balances, in reality, we're talking about human lives. We're talking about women, children, for families living under terror and violence without electricity, without water. The Kurds of the area, the ones who were in the first line against ISIS, fighting ISIS. They fought the jihadists. They sacrificed themselves. They protected not only their land, but international security as well. Together with them, the Christians of Syria, historical communities, today they're threatened with from disappearing. We cannot abandon the forces who are fighting ISIS. We cannot abandon them. There is a cleansing going on there. Damascus and Ankara are in the first line in this effort. This is the tragic reality. And Turkey has a very heavy responsibility. Those who believe that Turkey is a reliable strategic partner for Europe should notice this. We're going to put a snake in our house, and it's going to bite us. Remember what I'm saying. The European Union must demand real protection for ethnic and religious minorities. Our silence today will make us accomplices tomorrow. Thank you.
Urmează Insir Evin.
Jian Azadi, woman, life, freedom. We have all heard these words, but too few know where they came from. They are the foundation of the Kurdish-led administration in Rojava. They are the words shouted by Kurdish female guerrillas as they stood against ISIS. When others in Syria refused to fight, when the world hesitated, the Kurdish forces of Rojava stood their ground. In the midst of war, they built something rare: self-rule instead of tyranny, women's leadership instead of oppression, coexistence between Kurds, Arabs, and Christians instead of sectarian hatred. Those who defended us must now be defended. Yes, integration matters, but so does respect for ceasefire, so do minority rights, and so does the dignity, culture, and education of Kurds and all other communities of Syria. For long, this dress that I'm wearing today and this Kurdish flag was banned in Syria. For Syria to become truly inclusive and truly democratic, it must respect all its community. Beji Rojava.
Urmează domnul Jaroslav.
Mr. Knott.
Mr. Chairman, the members of the European Parliament, the ongoing violence in northeast Syria is a humanitarian tragedy with devastating consequences for civilians caught between warring parties. Families are displaced, children live in fear, and the basic securities are the constant threat. As parliamentarians committed first and foremost to the security and dignity of our nations and of people everywhere, we must recognize that European stability has a direct link to peace in its neighborhood. Therefore, we call for a durable and verifiable ceasefire that protects civilians without enabling endless military escalation. A ceasefire must be anchored in respect for local governance structures and be supported by concrete steps towards humanitarian access, reconstruction, and regional stability. We urge the international community, including the European Union and its partners, to prioritize civilian protection, uphold humanitarian law, and avoid policies that deepen conflict. Europe's role should be one of principled diplomacy, ensuring that peace, order, and respect for sovereign communities prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Urmează doamna Sita Kanko.
Madam Kanko.
Mr. President and dear colleagues, Madam Commissioner, once again, the Kurds in Syria are being sacrificed on the altar of cynical geopolitics. Their communities that heroically defeated ISIS are being displaced, shelled, and coerced into perilous negotiations in Damascus by a regime backed by extremist militia, freed ISIS fighters, and groups supported by our own NATO ally, Turkey. These are the same Kurds who, with our allies, dismantled the caliphate, only to face betrayal from those who now court a regime built on extremism and terror. Remember, Giuliani is this man who once rejoiced in the 9/11 attacks, who has overseen atrocities against Alawites, Druzes, and now Kurds, and who has released thousands of ISIS prisoners to bolster his ranks, all while shaking hands in the West and promising peace he never delivers. Yet, less than a year ago, the EU pledged 2.5 billion in financial support to the new Syrian regime for 2025 and 2026. A resurgent network of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, remnants on Europe's doorsteps, threatens us all. So, dear colleagues, why are we paying for it? If we abandon the Kurds now, we abandon not only them, but also Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează domnul Willy Sondale.
Thank you. Mr. Sondal.
Speak in Danish. Kan kurderne i det nordlige Syrien...
Thank you. This really is one of the most important issues that we're discussing today. The Kurds were our allies when we were fighting against IS, which helped us very much, therefore, to support our values. But now, the Kurds are a people who don't see a future in their own country, maybe only in Europe. We need to fight for the Kurds. This is something that's important for us too. And we need to defend their rights to live in freedom so that their language, their culture, their traditions are all protected. We need protection of the Kurds. It's vital. Thank you.
Urmează Georgios.
Thank you, Mr. Giorgio.
Commissioner, there is no good extremism, not useful violence. We are doing the same fatal mistake in Syria. Once again, we are naming violence as stability and covert jihadism as a transition towards democracy. The Commission of the United Nations for Syria noted that in 25 we had very horrible events in the coastal areas and the western areas of the country. Killings, violence, thousands displaced from the cause of the Alawites. Now they're moving against the Kurds. The European Commission supports politically Jolani, who is a jihadist, and the new regime, and Turkey, of course, which in agreement with Jolani is increasing the violence against the Kurds and is murdering Christian populations. I'm asking directly, where did you lose your moral compass? How can you legalize crimes against civilians? You should stand on the side of the victims at last, no with those who commit all these crimes. Thank you.
Urmează
Thank you very much.
Madam Commissioner, the international community has welcomed the political agreement and the ceasefire agreement reached between the Syrian government and the SDF from March 2025 and January this year. Yet it's crucial that these significant steps towards de-escalation are carried out in a way that will finally bring peace and protection to all citizens, of course, to all ethnic and religious communities in the country. In this sense, the Institute for the Documentation of Human Rights Violations against Religious Minorities in the Levant has published recently on February 3rd a report documenting and denouncing that Alawite, Druze, Kurdish, Yazidi, and Christian communities in Syria face targeted killings, abductions, forced displacement, and other forms of religious persecution. So what can the European Union do in this situation? Well, I will suggest at least two things. First, in addition to all the efforts that the Commission for the Mediterranean is doing, I think the Commission should also finally appoint a special representative for religious freedom. It's something that has been promised a year ago. It's time to deliver on it. Second, to promote a federal constitutional framework in Syria, granting local and minority self-governance. I think that the EU should support the right of all citizens in the country to have an inclusive political system that will guarantee peace and stability. Thank you.
Hvala.
Thank you. Mr. Shida.
Peace and in Syria is not only essential for a stable Middle East, but it is also important for Europeans' security. And right now, those were our closest partners in fighting for this security, namely the Kurdish communities in northeast Syria, are living with an unstable ceasefire following weeks of persecution and dramatic killing. A long-term stable Syria can only be built on an inclusive society. Inclusivity for the Kurdish, for the Druze, for the Syriacs, for the Christians, for the Alawites, for the Yazidi, for the Ismaili and the Sunni Arab communities. And of course, Syrian sovereignty must have a precedence, but this is not only a question of a country's right of sovereignty, it is also a question of human rights and of self-determination. And therefore, I think we have to be clear. What's going on now in Syria is not good, and we have to work together with all those which are asking for a stable Syria, that we establish an inclusive society there.
Thank you. Mr. Milacek.
Pani komisarz, Wysoki Parlamencie.
Commissioner, colleagues, the Syrian crisis, which is a civil war, stems from the failure of a range of world powers. Barack Obama talked about the red line with regard to chemical weapons, but that didn't work. And then we turned a blind eye to the activities of ISIS. Russia stepped in 2015, and its actions have led to the death of thousands of people and to chaos, and it has pushed Syria into this civil war. Now, when we look at the violence in Syria, in particular against religious minorities, it's a real tragedy. Thousands of people have been displaced, and many of them will come to Europe. Prisoners have fled from the prisons, and many of those have European citizenship, and that's a risk for us. We've seen how the Druze, the Kurds, have been attacked, and the regime there doesn't respect human rights at all. And so we have to cooperate with the US. We have to protect our borders, and we need to solve this problem.
Madam Langsimper.
Werter Herr Präsident, in Syrien, in Damaskus, ich glaube schon, dass Sie...
I don't know whether the president in Damascus is listening, but I would say to you, you may have won a war, but there's no peace. You've been in power for a year now, elected, unelected, whatever. You talked about an inclusive Syria. This is something that you and your transition government has constantly mentioned, but we're talking about massacres, hunger, exclusion, etc. We're not seeing an inclusive Syria. You may well have won a war, but you haven't won the peace. The Druze, the Alawites, and now the Kurds have been particularly affected. And Commissioner, that it should be clear to us what is happening. I mean, you said that we are the largest donors. Where is the money going? The right to self-determination is a fundamental right. Deciding that you can be free and independent is a fundamental right. That needs to be clear to all of us. Women need to be protected. Women have to have rights, because otherwise the situation will continue to be that you've won the war, Mr. Al-Shara, but not the peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clausen.
Thank you. I'm speaking Danish. I Syrien blev unge kurdiske kvinder smidt ud fra høj.
In Syria, young Kurdish women have been thrown out of the top of buildings by jihadist fighters. A lot of ISIS detainees were let out early. Unfortunately, fear has spread amongst the minorities of the country. Now there's a truce, which is good, and it needs to be properly observed. But unfortunately, basic needs aren't being met. Medicine, food. We're hearing of hundreds of thousands of people suffering and falling ill because of dirty water. Now, for Syria to become a country for all its citizens, Turkey needs to stop interfering. We need to work for that. We need to exert pressure for that. We need to exert pressure on Syria to ensure that it really provides proper protection for its minorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazilidis.
Dėkoju pirmininkė, komisarė, kolegos. Padėtis Šiaurės.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, the situation in northeast Syria remains tense. We welcome the extension of the ceasefire between the Syrian government troops and the Syrian Democratic Forces. But at the moment, it seems that we're just trying to avoid more escalation and to avoid a security vacuum in that region, which could be used by revanchist groups, those loyal to former President Bashar al-Assad or IS. Now, the fight against terrorism doesn't just mean arresting people and putting them in prison. We need a proper mechanism to ensure that people stay in prisons. Local support, international support for local partners needs to be continued. Otherwise, local forces will be left alone to deal with radicals. It seems to me that the government of Syria, the Kurdish government, etc., need to be given incentives to respect minorities, to ensure that humanitarian corridors are respected, and all of that needs to be done to ensure peace and security in the northeast of Syria as soon as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jalumur.
Good evening. 5 months ago, we led a mission, the first one to Syria, to witness the country's transition. We spoke with organizations, communities, civilians, Syrians, who, regardless their religion or background, asked for one simple thing: stability and peace. After years of brutal authoritarianism, that is the least they deserve. The images from January are terrifying: cruelty, persecution, terrorism, and the displacement of hundreds of civilians in northern Syria. And this reminds us of a past which we must never return to. Kurds do not deserve this. Alawites, Sunnis, and Arabs and Christians do not deserve this. In short, Syrians who have fought for a better country do not deserve this. We call for an absolute commitment to equality for all Syrians, and for sure we condemn violence. We demand the transitional government to guarantee a ceasefire and to continue the path of political and legal recognition for all peoples, as it did with the Decree 13 on Kurdish recognition. Syrian democracy will only be achieved with all voices included and with full territorial integrity. Respect for human rights is the only path for the European Union support. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Urmează domnul Cristian Terheș.
Mr. Terheș.
Thank you. At the heart of any lasting peace in Syria lies the protection of its ethnic and religious minorities. Syria is not a monocultural state. It is a civilization shaped over centuries by coexistence and plurality of multiple communities. Alawites, Druze, Kurdish, Yazidi, Assyrian, Armenian, and ancient Christian communities continue to endure targeted killing, abduction, forced displacement, religious persecution, and the systemic destruction of their sacred sites. After decades of authoritarian rules and 14 years of devastating civil war, Syria remains fractured by power vacuums that extremist actors have been quick to exploit. The ceasefire established in late January offers a moment of cautious hope, but it remains fragile and incomplete. Protecting minorities is therefore not only a moral obligation, it is a security imperative for Syria. Syria's future must recognize a fundamental truth of its history. Its unity and power stands in diversity, not in uniformity. No community should ever be sacrificed for a false vision of unity. Thank you.
Mulțumesc. Urmează Ana Miranda Paz.
Mrs. Anna Miranda Paz now, please.
Je donne une grande salutation aux représentatifs kurdes.
I'd like to welcome the Kurdish representatives who are up there. The Kurds can wait no longer. Turkey is letting them be massacred at Kobane, and what's the European Union doing? Nothing. When we needed people to fight Islamic State, the Kurds stood up and did it for us. They defeated ISIS. But basically, Syria has become a battlefield for various external powers who want to exploit its resources to the detriment of its peoples. And we need to sanction entities and individuals, and we need to ensure that humanitarian corridors are working properly to help people who are in areas under siege, particularly Rojava. We would also like to see recognition for humanitarian organizations and also recognition of the rights of women. There are democratic systems in Rojava that we want to see repeated elsewhere. We continue to work to ensure that Syria recognizes the rights of Kurdish people. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Urmează Jonas Sjöstedt.
Mr. Sjöstedt.
Herr talman!